Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm quite unsure, or I was quite unsure, of who I was going to give my Fighter of the Card award to. There were three prospects for me. There was Robbie Lawler, who probably wasn't expected to beat Josh Koscheck, and certainly not in that manner. There are a few people who say it was an early stoppage. No, it was definitely a flash knockout, I suppose you could say, but nevertheless I think it was a legitimate stoppage. And then there was Cheza, wasn't there, whatever his name was, the one who was fighting Anton Kuvanen or something. Then Kuvanen had a reasonable first round, but then lost it majorly in the second round. Again, you can say, I suppose, that he did very well defending the RNC for, you know, at least a minute and a half. But that wasn't enough. Both of those are probably worthy of a Fighter of the Card had it not been for somebody else. And that somebody else was Uriah Faber, who got a more or less a standing RNC, and was extremely... it was a nice transition to get that far. This was, in technically speaking, a rematch with Ivan Menjivar from God knows how many years ago. There was a slight controversy, I suppose you could say, in the women's event. The favourite nearly lost, but came back to win. Surprisingly, Lyota's style actually caused problems for Dan Henderson, which I'm a bit confused about. Although the result was only a split decision loss for him there. And the only other one, Matt Grice did nearly enough to win. He did quite well, I thought. A lot of people were saying that they didn't think he... they thought my pick of him was stupid. And okay, he lost, but he did a lot better than some people gave him credit for. Josh Neer was another one who lost on decision, I think. But I want to spend a few minutes talking about something else which is more of a concern to me. The UFC have a major problem. They have designed a new set of weight classes in the lower regions. They have designed a sort of accompanying weight division for the women, and they've inherited a lot of fighters from the recent closure of Strikeforce, and they've gone about handling this in a very poor manner. There are a number of things that they could have done. It's too late now, but there is a number of things that they could have done to avoid what they say is now an absolute priority for them, and that is to reduce their roster, which has sort of become all bloated, obviously with the influx of all these people. They also claim that, of course, they don't, you know, people are complaining that there's too many events as it is, and they don't have enough events to play everybody soon enough, you know, so that's why they can't keep such a large roster. And I understand that, but there is one major thing that they were very stupid in doing in the first place, and that's simply accepting the vast majority of people from Strikeforce straight into the UFC. A lot of people work on merit to get into the UFC, and I do not understand why some of these people from Strikeforce were just accepted into the UFC, just became a part of the UFC. My way of avoiding this would be one of two methods. Either the UFC only bring over the champions plus the #1 contenders, which I think is possibly more fair, because at least they have got to championship level in that organisation, and they deserve a crack at the UFC, and get rid of all the rest. Or, if they can't do that because there are some very, very talented people in Strikeforce but are not of the sort of quality that maybe landed them in the UFC to begin with, what they want to do is extend the card that they have already, maybe by 3 or 4 bouts, and play the Strikeforce people off against one another with basically sudden death matches, and say, look, if the winner of the match gets into the UFC, the loser does not. They also have a great problem with tough. The Ultimate Fighter, the design is that the winner gets into the UFC. That's not how it works, though. Actually, you know, at least 50% of the card have more than one fight. Sorry, 50% of any series of tough, the competitors, have more than one fight in the UFC after the termination of the actual reality series, which is absolutely nonsense, because what it does is it devalues the point of being a tough winner in the first place. There are so many toughers in the UFC, and, you know, only a handful of them are actually tough winners. A lot of them are just, well, people who were in tough, who sort of got brought into the UFC. Why is this a problem? Well, this is a problem because the UFC, being a private company and being an at-will employer, which is something I'll come to in a minute, are acting very, very, what I would say, irresponsibly, basically, in how they're managing this. The UFC have long since said that 3 losses in a row equates to a cut. Now, because they are an at-will employer, they make up the rules as they go along, and there is no no hierarchy or outside organisation that makes sure that they keep to their side of the bargain. In fact, many at-will employers do not even use contracts. They basically can hire or fire you because they don't like the look of you. And I have to say that this is a huge issue in the States. In the US, you've got most of the employment out there is at will. I'm talking really, really large companies, and they're all hiring and firing at will. They therefore give their employees basically no rights at all. You know, that they can get fired, and if they get fired, they have no right to claim that it was unfair or unjust or anything like that. And the UFC are being unfair, and I shall explain why. They're telling us that this purge of the roster is to allow the UFC to be the best. The top-notch fighters, the elite, are in the UFC. And if you're not one of the elite, if you're not fighting like all the fans want to see, not that I think Dana White knows anything about what the fans want to see, because he doesn't really consult us, and he does whatever he wants regardless of us. But he's shocked and appalled a number of British people this past week, because his cut last week included probably half the amount of British people that their company employed. And the reason it was unfair was, apart from the fact that they hadn't lost 3 in a row, in fact Paul Sass has won more in the UFC than he's lost, but now he can be shown the door. the reason this is unfair is because the UFC then turn around and say, aha, but Dan Hardy, we'll keep him because we like him. And that's outrageous. That's absolutely outrageous. They're keeping stalwarts and they're keeping people whose record is so much worse than these up-and-coming fighters who actually have a chance at growing to contendership level. And they're sort of spitting them up and chewing them, chewing them up and spitting them out. That's the phrase. One of which was John Fitch, who surprised many people. John Fitch, he's been long associated with having a very rough ride with Dana White. Dana White does not like John Fitch, never did. It goes all the way back to a big thing with the American Kickboxing Academy, where briefly Dana, on a whim, fired them all, everybody associated with AKA, until he was overruled by the powers that be above him. Thank goodness. And from then, I think he's been looking to get rid of John Fitch, and of course now he has an excuse that he can use. Well, we're now left with the scenario that there is a fighter last night, a big name fighter with probably quite a large following. He has lost 3 of his last 5 fights. He's lost 2 in a row. His name is Josh Koscheck. And if the UFC are to be legitimately believed in their assertion that what they are actually doing is making room for the elite fighters, they will cut him. If they don't cut him, our point is proven. And our point is this, that basically they are protecting the people they like and getting rid of the people that they don't value or that they don't like, regardless of how fair that really is. In England, they would not get away with it. We have employment law that protects against at-will employers which do not give their workers any rights. What I struggle with is how Americans and America at large, which is so into the rights of the individual, struggles to understand why British people, why some British people now will probably be quite surprised and maybe angry and, think it's a bit unfair that the UFC have cut Paul Sass, Shay Mills and Terry Eaton, kept Dan Hardy, because of course Dan Hardy is what we really want to see. The whole marketing British people, British fighters to British people is another thing entirely, but that's that's for another day. But they don't understand maybe why we see that as absolutely outrageous.